Well, good afternoon, everybody. Pastor Scott here. It is Saturday afternoon, April 20th, when I'm recording this. I realize it's been a few weeks since the last time I gave a video answer, or giving some help maybe on the reflection questions in the devotionals that follow along with our Church at Work series. It's actually been 3 weeks since the last time I did that. It was the week before Palm Sunday that we dealt with the theme that's the topic of week 7, which I'm going to be talking about here in just a second. And so it's been several weeks, and I do apologize that I've just been a little bit swamped with extra stuff going on here recently. But I did want to try to kind of load all 3 of these weeks together into one video. So this might end up being superfluous. You might not think that it's important because you already moved on from those past videos, and that's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. And you can keep listening. You can turn it off. That's fine. Whatever you feel led to do. But week 7, we talked about worship and heartfelt worship in the context of the church meeting. And the first text in the devotional for that week was Romans 12, 1-2, and then over in Romans 15, 15-16. And the question is, what is our true spiritual worship? And does it seem like a day-to-day practice or an infrequent one? And in Romans 12, the passage there that it's being talked about that you read is about offering ourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, for this is our true spiritual worship. Seems like worship here is offering ourselves to God in entirety, our whole attitude, an attitude where we are really seeking His will and seeking to live for Him, and it's an everyday type of thing. And so that second question, what does Paul mean when he refers to the offering of the Gentiles in Romans 15-16? Because it seems like it could be getting into some kind of confusing things about the relationship of Jew and Gentile. I really think that I don't think it's that deep. I think the idea here is that the offering that people bring to God is when they bring themselves to God. And when Paul talks about the offering of the Gentiles, he's talking about the nations coming to God, approaching Him. He himself is ultimate reality, and He is worthy of our coming to Him and acknowledging Him and lifting our attention and our eyes to Him. And so we must do this. And Paul worked so that the Gentiles would have a worthy offering to give Him. So the second devotional was Colossians 3:15 and 17 about addressing ourselves in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with thankfulness in our hearts to God. How do corporate psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs promote inner peace? Colossians 3:15, thankfulness 3:16, and worshipful living 3:17. The simple answer is that they keep God's truth in reality in our hearts in a way that engages more than just the intellect. When we have songs, when we have melodies, it engages more than just the intellect. It actually engages our feelings in some ways, and it gets our emotions involved as well in some degree. This is all about keeping God's truth in our hearts. And when it says to address yourselves in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, the newer translations say address one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, but it's not one another. That's not an appropriate translation, and it's a topic for another video why that's not the case. It really, the King James is right when it says address yourselves. I think the idea here is that we address ourselves in these psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, and it keeps God's truth before us. And as we have God's truth before us in an emotional way, like music even, it promotes inner peace because we know that He is peace. It promotes thankfulness because He gives us all things, and it promotes worshipful living because we're looking to the one who's worthy. So last devotional there for worship was Isaiah 6 and Revelation 4, passages about the angels singing to God, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. How often is this holy, holy, holy song to God in heaven is the question. The answer is that it's endless. It just goes on and on and on, night and day. Revelation 4 says they never stop singing it to Him. Why do the creatures or the angels say that they worship Him? They worship Him because He's the Creator, and they worship Him because He's the Redeemer. By your will, all things are and exist, they say in Revelation 4. The whole earth is full of His glory, it says as well. And so He's Creator. He's put His presence in His creation. You get into Revelation 5, it talks about him as the Redeemer. And the last question there with the devotion was, how do they worship him? Exactly how do they worship him? If you look at the verbs right before the song text, Isaiah 6 and 6:3 and Revelation 5, 8, and 10, it's very plain. They speak their worship to God. Worship is about the voices telling truth of God's goodness and his perfections back to him. In other words, glorifying him. That's what worship is. It's glorifying God and giving him the praise that he's due. It's acknowledging his worth. That's what worship is, worthship. And it's something that we speak to him. Of course, we can play instruments in a way that is God honoring. Of course, we can. But ultimately, worship in spirit and truth, as Jesus described it, happens from our hearts speaking worship to God. So the next week, week 8, about leadership. The first passage in the devotion was the passage that I preached, which is Mark 10:43 to 45, where Jesus had talked about how in the kingdom of God, leaders they don't lord their authority over people, but they must be servants of the people they lead, like Jesus, the Son of Man, came not to be served, but to serve. So what is the right attitude for leaders in God's kingdom? Very simply, it's humility, it's leading by serving, which leads to the next question: how did and how does Jesus lead the way in this? He did it by laying his life down at the cross for us, and he continually doesn't lay his life down for us, but he continually intercedes and advocates on our behalf before the Father because of his suffering and death on our behalf. So he repeatedly returns to the fact that he laid his life down for us. He's all the time serving us nonstop in ways that I don't have time to talk about here, but he leads the way in serving and leading us by serving us. And so leaders are supposed to reflect that as well and look at themselves as servants of others. Numbers 16, 1 to 5, about Korah's confrontation of Moses and Aaron. What led to this? Why did they do this? You look in the passage before in chapter 15 where a Sabbath breaker is executed. And it seems a little bit harsh, but the fact is, God had said to Moses to execute Sabbath breakers because holiness is required for the people. The God who had delivered them and given them life had told them how it is that they can please him and obey him and follow him. And if people aren't going to do it, then the God who gives life has the right to take life as well. And so Moses and Aaron are the ones who were commissioned to do this. And so Korah thought that they were out of line doing this, out of line, frankly, for enforcing the law of God on a sinning Israelite. And so what's the difference between Korah's approach and Moses' approach? Korah comes to them and says, you're out of line. Everybody here is holy. He's proud. He gets a big crowd. Moses responds by bowing down and putting his face to the ground and pleading with them to stop this rebellion. Just notice his humility as you read the passage there. And so what happened to Korah's group? The ground opened up and it swallowed them. There was a sinkhole. And I think you could argue that this is kind of the basis of the scripture's teaching on hell being under the earth, because the ground opens up and swallows Korah and his followers to show that God is on Moses' side in this and not on Korah's side. Compassion is a good thing. Mercy and long-suffering towards people who sin is a good thing, but God is that way all the time. And this guy apparently who'd broken the Sabbath had had chances before and had frankly used them up to the point where he had turned against God. So read 1 Peter 5, 1 to 5. That's the next one in leadership. And Peter, interestingly, there at the beginning when he's talking about himself as an elder in the church, he also says that he is a witness of Christ's suffering. Why do you think that he appeals to this? I think because it pictures the life of leading, where Jesus had talked about much earlier, where we're supposed to lead by serving. Jesus himself did this, led by serving and giving his life as a ransom for many. So Peter alludes to this when he's talking to elders in the churches. There in 1 Peter 5, he says, I saw how Christ led. And so that gives me an insight into how you are supposed to lead. So I think that's why he he approaches it that way. How does that color next our approach to A, exercising church leadership, and B, our relationship to leaders? A, leaders again are supposed to lead humbly, graciously, mercifully, the way that Christ did and the way that Christ does. And then secondly, our relationship as church members to our leaders, we should humble ourselves under God through them. They might be imperfect leaders, but God's placed them over us. And so we should acknowledge him by acknowledging these are the people who God has placed over me. How can I come alongside of them, and how can I listen to God rightly and submit to the leadership of this individual in the church? Even if I disagree, if I do, I approach them about it and talk to them about it. But ultimately, I have to humble myself. So I said I was going to do all three. I think I'm just going to stop here because it's pretty long. And I think I'm going to try to double up next week as well. But I wanted to keep this brief, and I'm right at 11 minutes here, so I'm going to stop. And hopefully this has been helpful for you. I'm going to deal with intergenerational ministry and sacrificial living in one video next week. And hopefully it'll be shorter than this one. So Lord bless you. Hopefully this has been helpful. We'll talk to you soon.